Hi guys, this is Watercolour Bites, and in this episode we're going to be looking at some basic pointers to get started with portraits and faces. Let's have a look. Welcome everybody, my name's Tom, thanks for joining me. The last video I did looking at simplifying shapes painting a cheetah seemed to really help a lot of people. I had some good response to it, so I thought I'd kind of continue along this theme but look at portraits and painting faces. So I'm the first to admit that I'm absolutely not an expert in painting portraits. I don't always necessarily get a great likeness, but I really love painting people, I love painting faces, I love painting portraiture. And painting faces is hard at the best of times. I think painting them in watercolour is particularly hard because we don't have that freedom to kind of add lights and things on top necessarily. But some basic little pointers can go a long way. There's going to be some future videos where I really go into detail about the proportions and looking for light and shadow a little bit more. In this particular one, which is as good as side on, which makes it a little bit easier, I wanted to look at breaking it down into very simple shapes and how we translate that into a painting. Much easier if I just explain it visually. Let's have a look. Okay, so this is our man. The first thing to mention that this is as good as side on, which does make painting him significantly easier than kind of 3/4 view or any kind of variation of front on. We only really have to deal with, especially because he's got a beard as well, we only really have to deal with that kind of triangle from around from the kind of corner of the eyes down to the nose. What proportion is that? How are the features spaced and aligned, and that's what we're going to look at to start with. And then I'm going to look at a few different distances that we should be checking to get things accurate, and then a few little kind of extra points to help us align the features and get everything as accurate as possible. Let's have a little look. I've got another video planned where I'll also break down the kind of proportions of the features, because if we could see the chin, there's a few little pointers we can look for the relationship between the eyes and the bottom of the nose and the chin and the mouth. Don't really have to think about that here, which again makes this much simpler. The first thing that I want to look for is just some basic angles. So one consideration here is just very simply, what is the angle of the bottom of the nose? It's not actually completely horizontal, it's got a slight tilt to it. The second thing that I want to look for here, which is quite interesting, which is the perspective of the features. Even though it's a face, because the face is turned away from us, we still have almost like a perspective to the face, because it is a 3D form and the features sit within this 3D form. So something I always look for is the angle or the tilt from top of eyebrow to top of eyebrow, which is the top line here. And then I always look for kind of center of eye to center of eye, what's the line there. So I use my brush, but you can use a ruler or pencil or just do it by eye, always working out any angles, tilts or perspective lines that are important. Then once I've established a kind of line of the basic features, in this case just the eye and the nose, I really want to check that distance. You know, it's very easy to accidentally elongate and exaggerate vertical distances. So a very common mistake I see, and one that I make, is making that nose too long. And equally, it's very easy and quite common for people to kind of underestimate kind of horizontal distances. So the width of things, or the distance between the eyes, the width of the eyes, the distance from the corner of the eye to the back of the head, quite often get kind of undercooked a little bit. So really important distances to check. And once you've established certain distances and you're happy with them, you can actually use these as a unit of measurement for the rest of the head. For example, the distance from bottom of the nose to the centre of the eye line, or the bottom eyelid, the perspective line there, is pretty much the same as the distance from that same point on the eyes up to the hairline in this particular instance. So that's a really useful little unit of measurement, and we can use that distance from bottom of nose to eye line as a unit of measurement in other places on the face as well, just as a point of reference to help us place things. Great example is that same distance from eye to bottom of the nose is pretty much exactly the same distance from the kind of corner of the eye socket shadow to the other corner of the eye socket shadow. Really useful little distance there. It's also very close in size to the bottom of the top eyelid and the top of the headscarf again, and then other great little distances to check relative to that to help us gauge kind of the distance of the face. Our corner of the eye socket to the hairline kind of vertically. Really useful distance is this line from the shadow of the bottom eyelid to where the beard line starts, and another really useful distance is top of the beard to bottom of the beard, all the time using the distance of the nose as one example of a unit of measurement to help us get these right. The next little tool I want to talk about I find incredibly useful, and this is looking for kind of vertical and horizontal plumb lines to help us align things. So a vertical plumb line, either imaginary or drawn out when you're drawing your piece or painting. Tip of the nose, vertical plumb line up. Does it meet the forehead or the outer brow? Is the outer brow further out or further in than that kind of vertical line? Again, plumb line up from the nostril. What does it meet? Just the corner of the eyes ever so slightly inside that line to the right. Again, corner of the eye socket, the outer corner, if we draw a vertical line down, what does that line up with? It kind of lines up with his neck. And equally horizontal lines to help us work things out are very useful. What's the line or the tilt or the angle from the bottom of the ear on the right to the bottom of the nose? It's got a slight upward tilt from ear to nose. That's another really useful little kind of alignment tool that we can do. I use this all the time, whatever I'm drawing, horizontal and vertical plumb lines to see what things line up and where. So that's kind of our basic alignment. Let's now look at how we're going to analyze this guy in terms of simple shapes, simple light and shadow, and how we're going to translate that into a painting. So what I'm doing when I'm analyzing my subject, especially in watercolor, but it works for every medium, is that I'm thinking about simple shapes of light and shadow. In particular, in this one, we've got some beautiful, strong shadow shapes. Look at this amazing shape of his eye socket, lower eyelid, and even the top eyebrow. It almost looks like a kind of, I don't know, a weird long necked dinosaur kind of turning back on itself. Anything you can think of to help describe a shape and really simplify that shape down into its kind of essential essence. Equally, look at this amazing shape here. I'm looking for the deepest dark shapes first. We're ignoring what they represent. We're ignoring any real subtlety. I'm squinting and blurring my eyes and looking for those shadow shapes in their absolute simplest form. And I'm going to go around the face and pick out some of the darker, most dominant kind of shadow shapes. Another great shape down the side of the nose, but this isn't a deep shadow, it's more of a mid-tone, so we're going to kind of treat it like a mid-tone. So for this exercise, I'm going to be looking for deep dark shapes, a simple mid-tone and a simple light, and look at how well we can describe the face just using those basic tones. Lovely big kind of mid-tone shadow shape down the face, and then I absolutely love this tiny little dark of the far eye socket that describes the bridge of the nose so brilliantly. So those for me, when I squint, are the kind of essential first biggest shapes. Let's have a look at it without the photo. You can see we kind of get a sense of what the subject is, but we can go a little bit further than that and start to analyze it on a slightly more detailed level, but without going too far. Love that tiny little bit of mid-tone just on the tip of the nose. It just helps describe the shape of the nose and trap the light a little bit more. The beard is an obvious shape, although in reality that's just an area where we can do fairly free-form kind of wet into wet work. And interestingly, that little tuft of hair at the top I think is really great because it shapes and traps the light on the forehead and also casts a shadow on the forehead. This big dark bit of hair here I just kind of popped in as a little bit of information. And actually the beard, the big shadow down the side of the face, and that big black bit of hair at the top could all become one big wet into wet shape, which really just leaves us with that as one big shape. The eye socket, the side of the nose, the nostril area and the tip of the nose, the distant eye socket, and the hair as well to kind of describe roughly where the forehead is. Those are the important big shapes. Everything else we can kind of do whatever we want with it as long as we stick to this simple pattern of light and shadow. And actually we can do whatever we want with these areas here as long as we are aware of the sort of tonal value we are aiming for and that underlying pattern of light and shadow is what's going to make this painting work. It's what's going to give the character, it's what's going to tell us it's a face, it's what's going to allow us to let the paint just do its thing, and we can really throw it around having this in mind the whole time. Let's have a look at the painting. Don't forget, you can see a much longer fully narrated version over on my Patreon teaching channel of this particular painting, plus a few shorter versions, links in the description. So here I'm just kicking off with New Gamboge yellow, a little bit of an Aussie red gold which you could replace with orange. It's really just a convenience colour, but I'm effectively lightly mapping out the dominant shadow areas with a view that I am going to go darker. So here I start chucking in a more concentrated kind of full fat milk consistency into a drying wash. That's really establishing that shadow down the side of the nose. We're starting to build up the shadow around the eye socket, and very much that deep shadow down the side of the face. As I said, the headscarf, the hair, the side of the face, the beard, that can all actually come together as one big shape, and you'll see I'm very much working wet into wet there. As I start committing to darker shapes, I do up the consistency of paint, less water. I let that first layer dry completely, and now I come in with a smaller brush, kind of full fat milk to single cream paint consistency. Again, the Aussie red gold with a little bit of a cool red in there gives me this beautiful kind of transparent shadow colour, and I'm starting to literally map out some of those basic shapes that I showed you in the analysis process. Obviously it's slightly more complex, I leave little areas of light showing, I take a little bit more time to make that accurate, but I'm just working on just that segment of shadow. I then mix an even stronger consistency of paint, moving kind of up to single cream, a little bit more red in there to darken it, less water. I look for smaller shapes of slightly darker shadow now within those bigger shapes. You can already start to see the eye beginning to appear. Now I commit to even darker shapes. I go up to kind of double cream paint consistency. A little bit of blue in there with the quinacridone red and the Aussie gold gives me this lovely rich, slightly warm dark. And now I'm starting to look for, in a slightly more accurate way, still painting kind of damp into damp, that very obvious, lovely dark shape around the eye. And doing it wet into wet will soften it into the surrounding shadow a little bit more. We're always looking for those kind of soft shadows, and then we can leave the very strong, sharper lights on places like the nose and the cheek. But really, I'm just taking the exact analysis that we looked at tonally, and I'm applying it to the painting. There are places where I may be pushing it a little bit darker while it's still wet, just to enhance the form and the shape. But really, all the time in my mind is that simple underlying pattern of tonal value. So I'm focusing more on tonal value than exact colour, although the colour is obviously important. These are just little touches and details now just to enhance that area. And that's kind of the strongest, most dominant area pretty much done. So now I'm coming into what I thought was probably the next most interesting and dominant shadow area, which was the nostril. Again, I'm just looking for that really simple shape that we found in the tonal segment earlier on, taking a little bit of care to map it out accurately, thinking about the little crease from the nostril down to the nose, that lovely kind of mid-tone shadow, which isn't as dark, I did in the first stage, so that was kind of blocking in the lighter mid-tone on the side of the nose there, which is still an important shape. It ties the features together. Now, whilst that shape on the nose is still wet, I go back in with exactly the same mixture of paint, which is quinacridone red, a little bit of Aussie red gold, and a touch of blue to darken it, about single cream paint consistency to get it nice, rich, dark. And I just block that shape in, knowing that the tonal values will work because of the way that I've thought about this in advance, allows me to kind of trust the paint to just do its thing. As long as I know what I'm doing tonally, that will make the painting work. Then I feel comfortable letting colours flow together, letting the paint just do its thing, and kind of letting go of being in full control. The beard I choose to leave much as it was in the start. I add in a few little slightly darker accents just to hint at the mouth. Very easy to overfuss the beard, but actually it really doesn't need much, because our eye and our attention as the viewer is drawn to his eye, and to a secondary extent, for me at least, to the nose. That little triangle of the two eyes and the nose is what pulls my attention. I kind of skip over and look at the hair and the headscarf and the beard, but I then flick back to the eyes always because it's the focal point. So that means we can make things like the hair and the headscarf and the beard a little bit more abstract. It doesn't have to be so well worked out. Love this shot of phthalo blue. Phthalo blue is such a great colour. I never planned to do this at the start. It just felt like it needed something to trap the light on the turban, to offset a lot of the kind of warmer colours. Just that little blast of blue works really nicely. You'll see in a moment that that blue actually just bleeds wet into the shadow of the headscarf. And that could be deemed as a mistake if we didn't plan it to happen, but actually I really love the end result. What it does is basically create a background shape that flows wet into the headscarf, which flows into the hair, into the side of the face, and down into the beard as one big shape, which we discussed in the analysis part of this. And what this does is it slowly makes the eye feel more and more realistic because the areas around it become more and more abstract. And really that's it. I focused on just those simple shapes and barely any more than that, and we create a fun, expressive, exciting and characterful portrait just out of those basic shapes. There we go, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it made sense. I hope you got something out of it. If so, please do consider subscribing. There's loads more videos to come. Don't forget to hit the like button and the bell to be notified of new videos when they come out. There's a few different versions over on my Patreon teaching channel, including a much longer narrated version of this particular portrait, plus a whole load of other stuff. Details and links down below, plus links to all of the other places that you can find me. Keep an eye out for more videos to come. Until next time, happy living, happy painting, and I will catch you soon.